a new a new report from Body Safety Australia and Respect Victoria on preventing image-based harms enacted between children and young people. I'm Helen Bolton, CEO of Respect Victoria, and on behalf of Body Safety Australia and Respect Victoria, thank you for joining us today for the launch of this important research. Wherever you're joining us from, across Victoria and Australia, we are on unceded sovereign First Nations land. I'm joining you this afternoon from the lands of the Wadawurrung people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands you are all joining us from and to all First Nations people here with us today. On behalf of Body Safety Australia and Respect Victoria, we recognise the significant and ongoing impacts of colonisation, and we deeply commit to working alongside First Nations communities to effect change. We recognise the ongoing leadership of First Peoples in addressing and preventing gendered violence, and we will continue to walk alongside and collaborate for safe and equal communities. Body Safety Australia and Respect Victoria also acknowledge the significant impact of family violence and violence against women on individuals, families and communities, and the strength, trauma and resilience of the children, young people and adults who have and who still are experiencing this violence. We pay our respects to those whose lives have been taken and to their family members and friends. We keep at the forefront of our minds all those who have experienced family violence and other forms of abuse for whom we undertake this work. Social media platforms, online gaming, algorithms, AI-generated content. The world that children and young people are growing up in today is rapidly evolving and influencing how they connect to each other and how they form relationships. At the same time, they're figuring out how to translate what they get from online content and the connections into their offline life at school, home, and in their communities. We're all here today because this complex social and technological environment means that we need to think differently about child safety and preventing gendered violence. To help this thinking, Respect Victoria was privileged to partner with Body Safety Australia around a year ago to undertake rapid research into prevention and protective factors for tech-facilitated gendered harms. This work originated out of a call to action from Diane Carson, CEO of Body Safety Australia, where she highlighted how research and frameworks that the primary prevention sector uses to inform our work don't adequately address how digital technologies are normalising and thereby enabling violence and harmful behaviours between children and teenagers. The pace of research, as we know, often struggles to keep up with innovations in technology and how it's adopted and used, especially by children and young people. But organisations like Body Safety Australia working on the ground have data and evidence that can be leveraged to generate innovative research findings that speak to these rapidly emerging issues. By drawing on focus groups with facilitators who teach consent and respectful relationships education to students of all ages across Victoria, this work highlights the importance of centering the voices and experiences of practitioners in that prevention research. The findings this research has generated highlights the importance of organisations doing different prevention work, partnering across communities. One of the key contributions of this work is how it introduces the concept of image autonomy, the idea that everyone has the right to decide when and how their image is taken, altered and shared into research and policy literature. This term was coined back in 2018 by Diane, and we're fortunate to hear from her towards the end of today's webinar about where that term came from. We're indebted to the work of Diane and the BSA team for helping us to think more holistically about preventing technology-facilitated violence and harm. Today, we will hear about the findings of Your Image Belongs to You from the lead researchers who authored this report, Kate Hepworth from Body Safety Australia and Hazel Donnelly from Respect Victoria. And I'd really like to take the opportunity to commend them both. It is excellent work. We'll then hear from a panel of experts from education, youth outreach, primary prevention, online safety, and research to unpack what the findings mean for future prevention practice, policy, and research. BSA CEO Diane will close today's event with some reflections on the next steps for preventing image-based harms enacted between children and young people and the importance of conducting research directly with them. The landscape of rapidly evolving technologies can be incredibly confronting, even overwhelming, to consider as both prevention practitioners, families, and communities concerned for our young people. Our hope today is that this research enables productive conversations and actions to keep our children and young people safe, both now and into the future. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Kate and Hazel to talk through the findings of their research. Thank you.
Hazel, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, wrangling screens. I just wanted to say before we begin, I just wanted to flag that if any of this content that we talk about today is distressing or you'd like to talk to anybody or seek help, there are support services available. Their information is on this slide, and my colleague will put the information in the chat as well. So, this research was prompted by an increasing number of reports of boys in Victorian schools using AI to create nude and sexually explicit images of girls and circulating these images on social media. The proliferation of this abuse has shed light on the rapidly evolving issue of technology-facilitated gendered harms enacted by young people towards other young people and the need for novel approaches to preventing these harms. When designing this research, we were also interested in investigating how we might conceptualize the role of social media algorithms in contemporary violence prevention frameworks, given what is known in the literature about how quickly social media platforms serve misogynistic content to boys and young men, and how this can influence them to enact harm towards their peers and teachers in classrooms. This research was an exploratory qualitative study, and Kate and I are indebted to our colleague, Dr. Stephanie Lusby, for working closely with us and generously sharing her qualitative research expertise. We'll get the chance to hear from Steph as she moderates the panel discussion later. So, drawing on the knowledge and extensive practice expertise of a specialised group of respectful relationships practitioners, we sought to explore two interrelated research questions. The first question asks, how can respectful relationships educators' observations about how children and young people talk about social media, gaming, online safety, and image sharing help us to understand how to prevent image-based harmful sexual behaviours, including those using AI? Our second question asks, in what ways might social media algorithms be understood as a contributing factor to gendered violence enacted by children and young people? So to explore these research questions, we conducted two semi-structured focus groups with 9 respectful relationships educators working at Body Safety Australia. Participants had been working as educators at Body Safety for between 6 months and 7 years and had experience working in Victorian early childhood, primary and/or secondary schools. Each of these educators works with hundreds of children each year, and between them have thousands of hours experience conducting respectful relationships and consent education. Because of this, they provided us with a rich source of qualitative data to undertake a thematic analysis. I'll now hand over to Kate to talk through what we found.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Hazel, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to have a bit of a discussion about the key findings of our research. So I'll move on to the next slide and highlight our first key finding. So it was that children, young people and adults do not appear to understand the concept of image autonomy. So I really want to take a moment and define image autonomy for you. So as next slide, please. Thank you. As Helen mentioned, the term image autonomy was coined by Diane Carson, and it was to describe the right of an individual to make informed decisions about participating in a photo or video, having informed consent about how their image may be used or altered, and how it may be shared. Image autonomy is a strength-based approach to taking, creating, altering and sharing images, and it recognises children's agency, their right to participation and respect for the rights of others. Next slide, please. So on the slides, you'll see some of the quotes from the focus group participants we did the research with that illustrate the key themes explored in the report. So firstly, that parents and carers may influence how young people share their images. Many adults don't appear to model a culture of consent and respect for image sharing with the children in their lives. And the educators in the focus groups reflected how, in the early childhood space, digital documentation of children without modelling consent, such as asking to take their photo, is very common. And so how might this impact their work in the respectful relationships education classroom is that it creates a challenge when the participants begin to have discussions with school-aged children about safe and consensual image sharing practices with their peers. They told us that often they might be the first adults to actually tell children that they have a right to what happens to their image. And even at the primary school level, children appeared to have already internalised that they didn't have agency over their image and to consent whether their grown-ups would share images of them on social media. And so this lack of modelling of children's agency for image sharing then appears to be reinforced in the online space by the way that social media incentivises high volumes of image sharing for social and financial success. So, for example, a day in the life content is very popular. Think like family vloggers or gaming streamers. Some of the participants remarked that they taught 8-year-olds who had gone viral or children who had multiple accounts with their family, particularly mother-daughter accounts being popular with the young people that they taught in schools. So I'll move on to the next key finding, which is that exposure to gender norms, stereotypes and misogyny across online platforms may influence young people's behaviours in the classroom. And so the reflections and observations of the participants found that children's online safety was driven by and reproduces gender stereotypes and gender patterns of behaviour. This was consistent with the existing research, which showed that endorsement of regressive gender stereotypes and roles increases children age. So, for example, for children, younger children of all genders were observed to be gaming, whereas in upper primary school there was more of a divergence and a gender difference, where girls were more likely to be on social media and boys to be more likely on gaming and gaming adjacent platforms. These gendered online lives influenced the language that the participants heard in the respectful relationships education classroom. They had mixed experiences with whether children and young people discussed manosphere content or influences in the classroom, but terms that were popularised within manosphere spaces and are filtered down into broader online mainstream culture are common. So alpha and sigma males, for example, which is used in the manosphere to refer to men who are powerful and independent. This language is not always repeated because a young person exists in these manosphere spaces, but they often reflected that it was more frequently used by children in a joking way and citing it as the language of the internet. And it signals the need for adults to really understand different online trends, mimetic language, and to understand potentially what young people are seeing and doing online. Participants also reflected that with this increasingly gendered online behaviour as children age, they also observed more resistance to the messages of gender equity and unpacking power and privilege in respectful relationships classes. And both of these are components of the respectful relationships curriculum. It appears that some of this resistance is driven by online content, and they named, for example, that during the widespread broadcasting and subsequent misogynistic online commentary on the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial, it really emboldened young people who were already resistant to actively push back against discussions of gender inequality. And that sometimes this was initiated by the classroom teacher observing the program, who would use critiques of Amber Heard to challenge the positions of Body Safety Australia staff and the curriculum, encouraging this resistance from students. These scenarios present a key challenge for educators in how to navigate this resistance safely, to know when and how to address resistance, and how best to minimise the potential harm for all students in the room. Our research also found that children appear to have limited knowledge of how social media algorithms shape their online experiences. So in general, the participants observed many children have a basic understanding of algorithmic curation. So by watching footy videos, they see more footy videos on their feed. And what it meant was many young people felt confident that algorithms wouldn't impact them because they understood how this curation works. For others, they did not appear to have an understanding of how algorithms push polarising content to increase engagement, and the way that this occurs is gendered. So consistent with other research, how a boy who might be watching those footy videos is then served manosphere content. One educator noted that some of the boys they had taught seemed to blame themselves when misogynistic content was served to them and felt shame as a result. And this brings us to our third key finding of the report, which is that young people's attitudes about image sharing appear to be shaped by the combined influences of harmful gender norms and poor understanding of image autonomy, and the actions of parents and other adults around them. So within that, our findings examine gendered perceptions of online risks and image-based harms. The educators reported that some boys talked in ways that indicated an inflated confidence in being able to outsmart people online who might be trying to groom or exploit them. And some boys flaunted that they engaged in risky behaviours online. In contrast, girls, even in that middle primary school, grade 3, 4, or sort of 8 to 10 age, are more likely to demonstrate in the classroom an awareness of the risks of image-based harms, both online and offline. We then explored the role of adults in actively shaping and reinforcing how children understand online harms and prevention. So they observed that some children lack an understanding of why online safety rules exist in the first place, because the risks of harm are not named to them, and particularly not in the case of peer enacted harm. The participants shared how children are often taught to block, delete, and move on, but in reality, it's not as simple as logging off, particularly if the harms that young people are experiencing are being enacted by a peer. The research also found that victim blaming of girls who've experienced image-based abuse remains prevalent from young people of all genders. And these victim blaming attitudes then lead young people to actively resist help-seeking messages in respectful relationships education. So using resources, for example, by the eSafety Commissioner and the Take It Down website, which can help young people have a nude image removed from online platforms. While the educators told us image-based harms using generative AI were not frequently discussed in the classroom, in general, young people in secondary schools seem to be broadly aware of the issue of AI-generated deepfakes. Some observe that boys often trivialise the impact of image-based harms, both involving real photos and AI, by framing them as humorous and not real harm, or by justifying the harmless nature of deepfake because they felt confident in their capacity to identify an image that was made using AI. And so ultimately, the focus group participants were largely concerned with the increasing normalisation of AI as lighthearted, frivolous, and disconnected from harm, and how this growing use of AI could impact teaching young people about image autonomy and consent for image taking, sharing, and editing. And this really highlights the importance of teaching image autonomy from a young age, prior to or alongside young people's exposure and use of these technologies. And now I'll throw it back to Hazel to discuss a little bit more about the implications and the future research directions drawn from our key findings.
Thanks, Kate. So, drawing on the findings, we highlight 3 implications for the prevention of image-based harms enacted between children and young people. Firstly, we suggest that image autonomy may be a protective factor for image-based harms. Considering how we take and share images has evolved with the emergence of social media and other technologies, it's important to also examine how social norms about image sharing have changed. This research suggests there may be a link between young people's attitudes and knowledge of image autonomy and their understanding and enactment of image-based harms. We suggest that building awareness of image autonomy with children, young people, and adults may contribute to prevention of image-based harms by starting to shift these norms, helping everyone, not just our young people, understand that your right to decide how your image is taken, altered, and shared is an extension of your right to decide who, where, and how others are allowed to touch your body. Second, taken together with the literature, our research suggests that while not causing gendered violence on their own, social media algorithms may contribute to gendered violence by driving and reinforcing young people's resistance to prevention efforts, such as respectful relationships education. This appears to be due to the proliferation of misogynistic content, as well as content that reinforces gender norms and stereotypes. This signals the need for a multifaceted approach that includes regulating and reforming social media platforms, as well as supporting children and young people to build their capability to critically engage with content online so they can continue to safely participate in online spaces. Thirdly, we suggest that adults appear to have a vital role in the prevention of image-based harms enacted by children and young people. This highlights the need for increased access to education, resources, and support for parents and caregivers to enable them to more confidently navigate discussions of online safety, consent, and harmful behaviours with the children in their care. Finally, the report suggests priority directions for future research. These include the need to engage with children and young people directly to ensure their voices are centred in research in a way that is not extractive or tokenistic. There is also a need for further research examining image autonomy as a protective factor, including empirical research to evaluate if and how it may serve as a factor in violence prevention frameworks. Body Safety Australia has some research already underway examining young people's understandings of image autonomy. We also highlight the need for further work to expand how we think about primary prevention and online social lives and influences, and to reconsider the framing of online as a static setting in primary prevention spaces and frameworks. Lastly, we emphasise the need to understand intersecting forms of structural discrimination in technology-assisted harm, including how children and young people are exposed to other types of discriminatory content, including white supremacist, homophobic, and anti-transgender rhetoric, and how this impacts how they enact image-based harms toward their peers. So that's all from Kate and myself. I'm now going to hand over to Steph Lusby for the exciting panel discussion we've got planned.
Well, thank you so much, Hazel and Kate, and welcome everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to have this research out into the world and to start testing the findings in real life. And we are so excited at Respect Victoria to have been able to draw on practitioner expertise and demonstrate that expertise as something that is really critical to furthering what we know about prevention. I am lucky enough and have, I feel, the easiest job on this webinar today of helping some very clever people to talk about how they might be applying or referencing this work in the work that they do. So you can scroll through the bios in the chat for a refresher. But today we'll be hearing from Jay Jones, who is an educator with Body Safety Australia, Annie Lamont, who is Assistant Manager at the Gender and Technology team at the eSafety Commission, Dr. Dean Farquhar, who is with the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition, and Marwoot Mo, who is a multi-hyphenate youth advocate and also one of the excellent contributors to our Respect Victoria's Kind Man campaign. So if I can get all of the panelists excellent on my screen. And so, Jay, I'll start by posing a question to you as one of the wonderful educators at Body Safety Australia. Hazel and Kate have been able to talk us through what respectful relationship educators hear from young people when they're doing this work. But perhaps you could share with the audience what it actually looks like in practice when you're trying to talk about image autonomy in classrooms.
I would love to. And hi, hello, everybody. Huge thank you for having me here and huge congratulations to Hazel and Kate for the report. The consent classroom, it is one charged by contradictions, particularly when we start talking about images. When I'm working with children, whether that's 3-year-olds or grade 3s or year 9s, they often do have a very grounded sense of bodily autonomy. They know, or at least they've heard messages like, my body, my choice. But those concepts have sort of failed to extend to their image. So once I introduce the idea that their image is an extension of their body and that their image belongs to them, it's often met with a huge amount of resistance. It sounds like, no, it doesn't. My parents take photos of me all the time and they never ask. Or, oh, but my teacher keeps printing photos of me for the school newsletter. Or my grandma keeps posting photos of me in the bath when I was a baby naked and she won't take it down. There has been this like prolific normalization of image sharing without conversations of consent that has laid the foundation to how children understand their right to their image. So it's so tricky then to encourage children to play a role in promoting image autonomy by asking their mates for consent before they take their photo, for example, when that's something that's never really been modeled to them and they don't actually yet have language around. Children have been, like I mentioned, sort of socialized without agency to their image, and then that's only further reinforced in their online worlds. I am in classrooms with children who are aspiring towards being YouTubers or content creators on TikTok or online gaming streamers, or they actually already have public accounts. Maybe they're shared with parents with hundreds, sometimes thousands of followers. And they're alongside that being raised with photos of them taken from the moment they're born, where sometimes they or maybe their peers have had their entire childhoods like live streamed and documented for public consumption through those like parenting accounts where maybe intimate details of their childhood, like toilet training or their first day of school, is being shared online for anyone to see, and that's shaped their sense of ownership over their image. And then they learn that their body is up for consumption. It's a commodity that can be used for social status with their peers or for profit. In the consent classroom, we unpack how these experiences are sort of shaped by power and also by gender. When I'm working with little children, so very small ones from age 3 and up, they're often very excited and proud to tell me pink isn't just a girl's color. Boys can like pink too, which is very sweet. Or girls can play sport. They're allowed to like dinosaurs. And then I'm in the grade 3 classroom, the grade 4 classroom, and this is where I see shifts, where they've internalized those rigid gender norms and they start to be the ones that police the gender of their peers. They can recognize in those conversations that gender stereotypes exist. They often say that those are ideas from the olden days, though. They recognize that those are ideas that are harmful, but then they are still the ones that are in the classroom enforcing that harm. They actually start to say things like at grade 3, no, it's disgusting for boys to wear dresses. That's gross. Or I'm in the secondary school classroom and they start to say things like, well, only sluts take nudes, so it's their fault. And those are the narratives that feed into the day-to-day classroom when we're chatting things like consent. And then we have to map that, just to make it more tricky and complex, against their increasingly online worlds and recognize the role of algorithms in shaping what is being fed to them, where we start to see the impact of those online harms play out directly in the classroom. We know that those like recommender systems are shaped by companies with intent to drive engagement. And so actually racism, sexism, transphobia, and ableism are built into the design of these systems. There are children in the classroom who I know are consuming this content and they haven't been given the skills required to actually unpack those messages, or the media literacy that they need to make sense of it themselves. So they come to school and they reenact those harms. Suddenly, the primary school classroom is a setting where children not only lack image autonomy because it's a novel concept to them, but they are also contributing towards the broader systems of harm that drive image-based abuse in the first place. We walk into the consent classroom with young children who are already holding rigid gender norms, who maybe have already started to become radicalized into those anti-trans spaces, or who have internalized racist rhetorics. And those students sit side by side with girls, with queer and trans kids, with children of color, alongside children who are not online at all, and then children who have completely unsupervised access to the online space and who are very online. And we have to meet all of those needs in that one room. We do so by introducing the concept of power and chat privilege. We unpack those attitudes. We work towards shifting those behaviors while recognizing that some of the students in the room have already experienced or who are at risk of experiencing this harm, side by side with those who are contributing towards their experiences of harm. That's why the consent classroom is so important.
Incredibly complex.
It is incredibly complex.
Yeah, and grateful for you and your colleagues who are working in this space. And I want to pick up on one of the threads that you just introduced for us there on around one aspect of many in what you have to manage there is around the design of algorithms and the design of online spaces. And throw to you, Annie, to talk about some of the work that the eSafety Commissioner is doing in a number of different spaces to think about safety and mitigating or meeting evolving needs in primary prevention.
Yeah, thank you, Steph and Jay, and lovely to see everyone on the panel today. So yeah, we at eSafety, we really try to work in a very holistic way across the spectrum of prevention to response and recovery, and that includes a number of approaches and interventions. And coming to what you were pointing to, Steph, around we have a body of work called Safety by Design, which is really focused on working with tech professionals and startups and platforms to try and start building in that gendered understanding from the point of product design, and to get that thought process of thinking about, well, what could be the unintended negative consequences of this product or piece of work that we're developing. That's just one portion of the pie. We obviously, our work, particularly in relation to image-based abuse, really rightly started in the response end. And I really just want to flag for anybody who's on this session today that eSafety has an image-based abuse scheme, which means that if this is happening to you or someone that you know, you can report it to us. And we have regulatory powers to remove or take action against the person who shared the intimate image, or to issue removal notices to both the individual or the tech platforms themselves. That now also includes the removal of deepfake made intimate images. So even though that this is a prevention gathering, please know that that is there and available. But from a prevention lens, though, what I really took away from the excellent piece of work that you've developed, Respect Victoria and Body Safety Australia, is the need for a more holistic, across-population approach to preventing technology-facilitated gender-based violence more broadly, and rather than just seeing it as a subset issue related to working specifically with men and boys, because as has been pointed out through the research and through Jay's comments as well, the problem is bigger and more complex than that. And I think what was pointed out by RV and Body Safety Australia in the research is the way of conceptualising of online settings as sites for digital prevention campaigns, but without doing the requisite work to actually address the root causes and the very specific nature of how violence is playing out in online spaces is going to limit the effectiveness of all of our GBV prevention work. I think for many of the reasons that Jay noted around how that dilutes or counters broader messaging occurring around consent, around respectful relationships. And so if we don't start working on this issue in a more holistic way, it means we're going to miss a real opportunity to stem and reduce future waves of violence and gender inequality more broadly. The other bit that really stood out to me in this report and in Hazel's discussion of it is, again, that piece around the way that digital spaces and products are not just reflecting our gender attitudes and values anymore. They are actively shaping and reinforcing generalised cultures of violence beyond just gender-based violence as well, which is really backed up by eSafety's most recent research on the online experiences of Australian children, which was based on 3,454 interviews with young people aged 10 to 17. And even for me, as somebody who's worked in the violence space for a while, the figures are pretty stark. 3 in 4 children, so 74%, have seen or heard content associated with harm at some point, which includes exposure to content that was sexist, misogynistic, or depicted direct acts of violence, like fight videos. 47% of those interviewed had seen sexist or hurtful things about girls or women, and 47% of those interviewed had also seen fight videos. So when you pull back and think about that, that's roughly half of young people are witnessing or have regular access to violent content. And what we already know from the prevention evidence base is that one of the key drivers of all forms of violence against women are male peer relationships that revere the use of violence. General cultures that condone violence, which again through this report what really stood out to me was how easy it is for people to dismiss IBA or digital violence as not that serious. We also know that witnessing or exposure to violence is a key risk factor for both future perpetration and experience. So when you start to think about how normalised violence and access to violent content is becoming, I think it's absolutely right what you've pulled out in your findings, that what we really need in response at the moment and what we're trying to drive through our work in the gender and tech team at eSafety is the rapid incorporation of technology-facilitated gender-based violence into existing GBV prevention policy analysis and programmatic work, including consent education, and the development as well of specific targeted TFGBV prevention programs that work with communities where they're at on this issue, because as also highlighted through your work is the low levels of awareness and the high levels of condoning around this particular issue. So in relation to that, eSafety is really proud to be supporting the implementation of the Preventing Tech-Based Abuse of Women grants program, through which we get to support NGOs and universities to start building, piloting and evaluating programs that address the drivers of TFGBV. We're so proud that the grants body of work covers a really broad range of projects, which includes dedicated men and boys work. We have under this round a series of dedicated projects being delivered by ACOs. We have projects that are working specifically looking at the influence of online gamers and how that's shaping gender norms. We also have projects that are working in Melbourne, looking at the accountability and respect and the normalisation of online misogyny for boys. So we're so proud of this grants program, because aside from the excellent work that they are producing, which will result in a series of resources, materials and tools for a range of Australian audiences, through our grants program, we're really starting to build the evidence base on what works in the prevention space for others to start learning and building and scaling up from. And so I'll just end on, given the audience that we're speaking today, that if you have an idea for an intervention in this space that you'd like to develop, you can absolutely go to our website and register for updates. The next round of our grants program opens in early 2026. So yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Annie. And it's commendable that you were able to fit so much of the incredible work that's happening out of eSafety into the short time that you were allowed today. But the breadth is really amazing, and we're so grateful and so proud to be able to collaborate and feed into some of that existing body of work and making sure that we're evolving our prevention approaches in real time, which is something that's always going to be necessary in this work. But I want to pick up on one of the pieces of work that you mentioned, the research with children about their experiences online. And we're so conscious, we're so proud of Your Image Belongs to You as a piece of work that foregrounds practitioner voices, but from very early doors in conversations about this work, we were really conscious that we don't have the voices of children and young people in that work, and there are all sorts of sort of necessary barriers, or barriers is probably the wrong word, checks and balances when you're thinking about ethical research with children and young people. And we need to balance them against the ethical imperative to allow young people and children to talk about their own experiences. And Dean, I know that this is an issue that you think about a lot in your work and with colleagues at the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about both the importance of centering the voices of children and young people and how we can think differently about navigating those ethical questions.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. It's very, very relevant. And as someone who comes from a research background, so I hold a PhD in youth political engagement, but also a practitioner's background of working in youth work, community youth work for nearly 10 years, going off and on. What I really find when we do the research and we do the engagement is that there can be a lot of synergies between those two ways of working within your research. So you can embed what we like to think of as a youth work approach within that research, and that helps to make that research that little bit more meaningful. So we follow all the ethical procedures that you would maybe expect of a research proposal or process, but we inflect those through those key principles that inform our work as youth workers. So one of the fundamental principles of youth work is that we maximize voluntary engagement of young people. We're always trying to give them as much choice and autonomy over their terms of engagement with us. And that means, firstly, letting them know they have that right to participate, but also always keeping them informed about what that participation entails and that they have the right to pull back and to pull out of certain elements of it. They don't always have to participate if they don't want to. And I think having that embedded within your approach and within your practice is a real way that you inform or embed that informed consent throughout everything that you do. And when I was listening to Jay talk about the consent classroom, it's that sort of always trying to give young people that control and that choice that really helps foreground those sort of conversations around, but also informed consent within that research process. I also think one of the things that we do as youth workers, and it's core to our practice and what we do, is we're always strength focused in what we do. There's a lot of deficit based accounts of young people, and these are actually quite unhelpful. They're unhelpful for a whole host of reasons, but primarily because they get in the way and they impede an open dialogue with young people. If young people feel that little bit judged or that you're not really listening to them, that they don't understand you, it inhibits them from really engaging in that research process and feeling safe to share with you what their concerns are. And that's not to say that young people don't experience challenges or that, as in the case in this discussion, that certain young people might present challenges. But I think there is something really core about holding that within your work, that even if this young person is presenting a challenge within the classroom or within the youth setting, they still have that potential and worthwhile contributions to make, not just to our work, but to society at large. So I think that's something that's really worth holding on to, because when young people see that you work in that way, they recognize it. They're not silly. They know who has their best interests at heart. If they don't get that from you, they're not going to open up and be honest within that research process. They'll probably just tell you things that they want, that they think that you want to hear, rather than engaging honestly. I also think another thing that we do very well is that we're very informal in approach, and we do it very relationship based. So we're constantly building up, that trust and those relationships with young people. And that can often happen over a very long period of time. So if you're looking to do some meaningful work with young people, like, they have to know that you have their best interests at heart, that they can have that trust in you. And I think that informality and that relationship building is so sort of key to that. And I also think a key part of that relationship building process is that you're always trying to meet them where they're at. So even just thinking in terms of research, like, what does that mean? Is this content engaging for them? Is the methodologies that we're using to gather this evidence, is that the best way to do that for this cohort of young people? Could we be doing more interactive group work sessions to get this evidence? Could we be doing more forms of creative expression and artwork, and giving young people those variety of ways that they can actually feed into these processes on their own terms? And I think the last thing that I want to sit with, because I think it goes to the heart of the question, is within youth work, one of the things that we sort of pride ourselves on is that we are rights-based practice, okay? So we acknowledge that young people, under Article 12 of the CROC, they have the right to be heard on the matters that are affecting them. That's not an option. It's not a nice thing to have. It is their right. So we do need to get young people's opinions and perspectives on all of these issues. We also need to make sure that we create those spaces, like I was talking about before, that they can do that. But we feed back to them with this research and all the rest of it. So when we do a research project, one of the things that can happen is we go away, we write the report, we publish the report in peer-reviewed journals, we don't get back to the young people. So part of that Article 12, that way of working, it's embedded within the Lundy model of practices. We close that loop, we go back to young people, we tell them where it went, we tell them what influence they had over these things. And I think if we're really working in that rights-based way, that can actually extend that way that we do that with consultations within youth work, that can be extended into those ethical research practices. But we also have to be quite realistic here. Like, we are working with young people. Young people do have the right to be heard, but we have to temper and balance that against our competing sort of safeguarding obligations to make sure that we are keeping young people safe. So we need to be constantly reflecting on, is this content age appropriate for these young people? Have we found the right words and the right ways of explaining these concepts? So, are we talking about boundaries in the right way? Have we found the right language to actually do that? Have we actually put the right safeguarding measures in place? Have we got the right sort of consent to do this? Have we made sure that the young people themselves have actively understood what's sort of going on? Do they understand where they can report harm to when we're doing this sort of work? And I think finally, one of the things that's very embedded within our work and within some of the consultations we do, have we signposted and embedded the necessary supports. So if they find something triggering, if they find something upsetting, that we can actually support them through that in the most appropriate way. That can even just sometimes signposting helpline, stuff like that, letting them know that they can come to their youth worker for help and guidance. They can check back in with us. That's one thing we always say. If you had anything come up, check back in with us and we'll be there. And I think that's another sort of real strength of actually engaging people who are actually working face to face with young people all the time in these processes is that there's off when you do that, and we did that quite at home for an awful lot of research projects with youth workers, is they already have those support systems in place. And if it is something that's going to be particularly triggering, is there maybe worthwhile having someone on the line like a counselor that can step in and provide that additional layer of support? So these are things that to every youth worker who's maybe on the call, they're common sense to us. We don't think about them. We run through this checklist of things in our head all the time, but it seeps into everything we do. And even at AAC, when we're doing our research and our consultations with young people, all of these things are at the forefront. But the one thing that I would say as well is that my PhD was in youth political engagement. So one of the things that happened in youth political engagement was that the methodologies were very formal. They were traditional methodologies. And when we did that informal approach, what we actually found was much more interesting stuff. So it's not just that what I'm saying is coming from a perspective of a youth worker who's flying the flag for their profession. In terms of the quality of evidence that you will actually get, but actually engaging ethically by deploying these tried, tested principles, you will get a greater quality of evidence. You'll get greater outcomes in policy, and it will just be a general improvement to what you can actually achieve as a researcher. But I'm very conscious, as I said, I'm from the youth sector. We like to talk. So I'll just end it there and I'll give the last speaker an opportunity to speak as well. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for that, Dean. And yeah, a lot of rich food for thought there. And who knew if you behave ethically, then you get better evidence that's more useful. I, Marwood, as someone who in their profession, as Dean put it, like engages face to face with young people and actually sees how, you know, the kind of the general ideas that that some of us have been talking about play out in real life. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about like what it actually looks like when you're talking with young people and trying to help them to challenge you know, content that they've absorbed online or from different places that is problematic, that you know is harmful to them or is sending them down the wrong path. And I know that, you know, Jay was able to tell us a bit earlier about working with younger students, and you tend to work a bit more with teenagers. So can you share some examples of what it looks like in practice?
Yeah, so pretty much within my work, I often see a lot of like young people, especially young men, being shaped online, from what they're seeing, kind of defines who they are. Obviously what we see with platforms are like full of messages about what it is to be a man or how to look or how to act and what to value. Many of these messages are really driven by algorithms and they reward outrage, conflict, and dominance, and not really empathy or reflection. So a lot of young people I work with already come from marginalized backgrounds, so these influences hit a lot more differently. So it's not really just them comparing themselves to what they see online. They're trying to make sense of where they fit, and often misrepresents or excludes them from everything. So with my role and how I approach, it takes more than one conversation. When a young person shares with me what they've seen online, maybe a video post, like something harmful or extreme, I don't jump in to correct them. I know this isn't about one post, but I try to address more about the identity of belonging and the need to feel seen. And so my approach is more about curiosity, not correction. So I would ask where they found it, what they think about it, and why does it resonate. This opens dialogue, not a debate. So like initially, I try to create a safe space before we even dive into any of our conversations, I reassure them if it's going to be too much, or you can leave if you want to change the topic, or setting boundaries for both parties between us, to remind them that they still have control of the conversation, and this is part of the building like a sense of autonomy in spaces where they often feel powerless, especially where I work, and teenagers still they also want to feel heard. Another approach for me would be most importantly, honestly, is building trust and reflection. I don't position myself in authority over them, telling them what is right or what is wrong. Instead, I try to invite them to think critically, think outside the box, about what benefits them, the messages, what they see, and like how these messages play stereotypes about race, gender, masculinity, and all this kind of stuff. So trying to unpack it together. Obviously, this builds the trust between us. And whenever they have an opinion, I would be saying things like yes and rather than saying yes but, because like when you say yes but, it's pretty much you're shutting down the conversation. So to show that you're actively listening. So from there, I acknowledge everything that they're saying. So there's a lot of things I try to work on. So how do I build their trust? I build it through like listening, showing vulnerability, most importantly for myself. I reassure them, affirm them, make them seem seen and heard, valued through their experiences, what they've been through, what they see. I would even share myself some um, parts of myself to know that it's okay not to be perfect. What you've seen, what you experience, because I grew up with the internet too as well, so I also share my experiences with that. So that's where the relation, try to bridge that gap, with the impact it could have on them. Um, you know, um, I aim to be consistent. Uh, Whenever you're having these conversations, be consistent with what you stand on. Uh, this creates like to be reliable. Make sure you follow through with the commitments, the conversations you had with them. Try to maintain a clear and predictable expectations while setting firm boundaries on your conversations. Because working with teenagers, they tend to cross boundaries, and you got to set them early. And having that early, like it just shows that level of respect towards each other. To like a lot of times I end up asking, but you ask on feedback. I ask them about my feedback on my opinion or their opinion. Like it's to involve the students, kind of teaching them to think critically, understanding how to have conversation. Whenever it comes to a conversation like this, it's not always about debate. It's more about we all need to hear each other. So when we have conversations about image autonomy, back to the main topic, it's not just about like body image or social media profiles. I try to it's about more about helping young people reclaim their power to define themselves. That's what I'd say to them. And it's in a world we live in where algorithm and stereotypes tell them who they are, where they need to be, like how to create this world of theirs. It makes them question themselves. So as adults, we can't really shield them from every harmful messages online. Unfortunately, we can't. But we can give them the tools, the curiosity, the critical thinking, and the confidence. Honestly, to see through it all and make choices that align with who they really are, not with what's the internet's giving them. So pretty much that's kind of like what the prevention works, how it works in my how I approach the young people. And one more thing, honestly, would be practice integrity, uh, being honest. As an adult, working with young kids, you got to be honest, admit when you're wrong, especially follow through on the promises to build your credibility, and get to know your students and take genuine interest in their lives, learn who they are, acknowledge their backgrounds and their experiences. And that's how I would, have these conversations with the young people to see, you know. But yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for that. And I at the end there, you were kind of like, yeah, that's pretty much it's an extraordinary way of approaching this work, and the grace and patience with which you kind of think through approaches is so apparent in the way that you talk. So thank you. And we've got 5 minutes left before we wrap up and hand over to our last speaker. And in that 5 minutes, I'd like to just do a whip around the panel and ask. Well, you've got two options, and you can take your pick. We've got someone from the audience has put in a question, noting that, because of the nature of the report, we've kind of been talking about what happens at the individual or the community level. So if you've got any comments around what more can be done to support at the systematic level, or more generally, what's at the top of your list, and noting, as you said, Marwood, that things take time, and you can't just pick one magic wand or something. But what's at the top of your list that you'd like people to kind of think about in terms of resetting these norms around image autonomy? And Marwood, you go first.
Sorry. Honestly, like I said earlier, it's start with curiosity, not correction, and have it over time. It's not going to be solved overnight. Have the conversation and just make sure they feel heard.
Jay, what do you think?
Oh, I could probably sit on this soapbox and talk for hours, but to keep it short and snappy, I would ask that everyone gives children the credit they deserve to be able to actually have complex and nuanced conversations. They are capable. I have spent the last year developing a brand new program on it's called image-based autonomy to promote young people's capacity to upstand against image-based abuse, to disrupt victim blaming narratives, to repair if they've caused the harm, and to help seek if they've experienced it. And we ran focus groups and accountability groups with young people to inform the program development. And from that, I have never been more confident about young people's actual capacity to shape these social norms, to shift this space, to lead the change that it is needed. But in order to do so, the adults around them need to give them that credit, to have those conversations with them, and to actually model what it is that we are asking from them. We actually have to be ones making an effort to practice and assert their rights to their image. So tell them their image belongs to them. Ask them for consent before you take that photo. Think more critically about your image sharing, particularly in an age of AI, and center children's rights in your parenting and your professional practice. That is my soapbox.
Love it. Dean, what about you? Any wrap-up thought?
Yeah, well, my wrap-up thought was, I think, there's a great value in listening to Jay and listening to Mawid. Like, I was a young men's development worker before I came out here, and sit and listen to Mawid as basically back in the Armagh office. Like, that was the way we talked about the work. You can tell that work works. And one of the things, and I was talking about the youth work approach being very valuable. Like, anybody that's listening to Jay or Mawid that would doubt that, I don't think you can doubt it, having listened to what they were sort of talking in the way they were talking about that work. You can tell they can really relate to young people and bring this work forward. So I think my closing reflection is, I do think we need to take that work more seriously, value it more highly, fund it more sustainably, and give it the credit that it deserves.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more. And Annie, last comments to you.
Again, like everybody, there's a soapbox that could be stood on, but I'd really love to see all of us having having more and better conversations at the household level around how gender is influencing our use of technology, who in the household sets up the new tech, who has control over the passwords, who has control over the banking apps, who and when do you or I delegate our responsibilities to other people, and does that create risk? And it's just starting to think through, well, yeah, how do we make this more equitable in our own lives?
Thank you so much. And I'm sure the audience has enjoyed and learned as much as I have from talking to you all. So really appreciate your time and contributions. And now it's my great pleasure to hand over to CEO and founder of Body Safety Australia, Diane Carson, for some closing comments for our launch today. Thanks, Diane.
Thanks so much, Steph. And congratulations, Kate and Hazel, for this really important report. It's been an incredible journey to watch this unfold. Thank you to everyone on the panel for such an informative and reflective conversation. I think that there was so much to be gained from all of the reflections that you had in your practice in there as well. When we started this project with Respect Victoria, at the time that we were doing that, the media was saturated with cases where teens, and usually boys, were taking, generating, and sharing nudes with other students. And those images were usually of girls and often much younger. And as a primary prevention organisation, we felt that we were fortunate at Body Safety Australia to work across the entirety of childhood, which meant that, we were working in early childhood education and care, in primary schools and in secondary schools. And we felt that we were fortunate because we get to observe the impact of working with children, with young children, on the behaviours of teenagers. And also the experiences of teenagers informed our work with young children. So when we were seeing those spate of cases come up in the media, we were also seeing how the media reporting on it were impacting very young children as well. We know that for every case of image-based harm that reached the media, there were thousands more young people who were also enacting and experiencing harm. We noticed that there were copycat cases happening in primary schools whenever there was a case reported in secondary schools. While on paper there might be a neat demarcation between primary prevention, early intervention, response and recovery, as the speakers in the panel showed us, in reality, we respond to harm when we're doing primary prevention, and we do primary prevention when we're responding to harm. Of course, our goal is to prevent harm to all children, and we do that directly by addressing risk factors. But we also work to promote and strengthen protective factors. And the best way to do this is not to wait until teens are enacting image-based harm, but to build foundational protective knowledge and skills from the youngest age. So when we work with 3 and 4-year-old children, as Jay pointed out, we ask them, who does your body belong to? It belongs to you. And about a decade ago, I noticed that when we were telling children that their body belonged to them, most parents and caregivers were really getting on board with that. The idea of consent for hugs and tickles was easy for them to understand and replicate at home. But at the same time, those parents were taking hundreds, if not thousands, of photos every single week of their children. My personal social media feed was flooded with videos of children laughing and sleeping, sitting on the potty, climbing, singing, and sometimes lying on the floor sobbing because they just discovered that their shadow was following them. It was about then that I started to explore the idea that if a child's body belonged to them, if we were giving children rights to choices about their own body, then ethically, if not legally, surely their image also belonged to them as well. And if teaching bodily autonomy or consent helps prevent sexual assault, then surely teaching image autonomy helps prevent image-based abuse. Discussing image autonomy also aligns with our organisational values of taking a strengths and rights-based approach. We are uncompromising, as Jay pointed out, on centering the rights of children and unflinching in stating that the absence of harm should only be the wallpaper of a child's life. We believe that children and young people should be able to inhabit physical and digital worlds filled with joy and humour, genuine connection, opportunities to learn, to play, to create. The prevention of image-based harm is the lowest bar. When Respect Victoria and Body Safety Australia came together to start discussing this project, we talked about the need to be nimble when researching and publishing on children and young people's experiences of new technologies. I think that the urgency can best be illustrated currently by looking at what's happening in early childhood education and care. Governments are racing to address the vulnerabilities in the sector that allow predators access to children. One of the solutions that really captured the public imagination and has actually gained traction is the installation of CCTV in early learning centres. The idea that the solution to preventing the production of child sexual abuse material is to film children while they are playing, eating, sleeping and toileting is just mind-blowing to me in how it undermines a child's rights to live and play without constant surveillance. From a primary prevention point of view, when these children are teenagers and adults, how can we expect them to understand their responsibility to respect their peers' digital autonomy when we've never afforded them the same respect? And so working across entire childhoods, our team intrinsically understands this. Jay demonstrated this when talking about his classroom experiences. However, our capacity to share what we learn from children and young people is severely limited because we're too busy doing the work to report on the work. Me personally, I am so grateful to Respect Victoria for recognising the work that not just our organisation, but so many grassroots organisations are doing in that sort of frontline space, in the prevention space. We're really honoured to be research partners and to take children's knowledge to the wider public. It's partnerships like this that really can influence policy and practice with the research grounded in experience. While it was amazing to have this research based on interviews with our team, it would be stronger still if we were able to talk with the children and young people themselves. And I think that you heard that really strongly from everybody on the panel this afternoon. And I'm not going to go too much into that because I don't think that I have anything to add that hasn't already been said in that space. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could not only do this work with young people, as we so often do, sort of age 16 to 24, but we could actually do it with 9-year-olds or even 5-year-olds, trusting them to be competent knowledge holders of their experiences. An early childhood educator that we're working with at the moment told me that she's actually set up a children's council in the centre where children from 2 to 5 years old are consulted on decisions that impact them every day. What would it be like if we could not only have that happen, but capture it and share it so that others could replicate it? Kate and Hazel today introduced the idea that image autonomy could be a protective factor when it comes to preventing tech-facilitated gender-based harm. I think it's beyond time for us to look at the evolution of digital technology and its misuse by tech developers and individuals in the context of risk and protective factors for gender-based violence. And as a country, we're at a particular point in time where the environment lends itself perfectly to further research. We have at the moment 2 different factors happening. We have the age verification legislation, which means that only 1 year apart, we have 2 groups of children with very different experiences of being on social media. But we also have new policies and procedures in early childhood education around the use of photo taking and sharing that have children only a year apart who have different experiences of their digital autonomy. Wouldn't it be amazing if we were able to do research now, but also longitudinal research on those two age groups? I want to thank everyone today for coming along, for everybody coming to listen to the panel, and for the panelists for their insight, to Kate, Hazel, Steph and the teams at Respect Victoria and Body Safety Australia for bringing this research to publication. The report can be downloaded from the Respect Victoria and Body Safety Australia websites, and there will be a QR code for you to be able to access that directly. My last words as we go out is that we have to stop deferring responsibility for children's online safety wholly to authorities. For the adults who have joined us here today, we'd like your takeaway to be a greater awareness of the role that you can play in modelling image-based consent with children and young people. And this can be as simple as talking to them and letting them know that your image belongs to you. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along.